Hello, everyone, and welcome to the midweek program here at the J.C. Raulston Arboretum. Today we are on the rooftop of the Ruby McSwain Education Center at the Crevice Garden because today we're going deeper in the garden with Tim. He's going to talk to us about crevice gardens and even show you how to make a little crevice garden of your own, which should be exceedingly useful if you are lacking the space for a crevice garden but would like one. Okay, and with the announcements out of the way, I think we can pass things over to Tim to talk about crevice gardening.
Is that what I was supposed to talk about?
I think so. I think that's what's on the schedule now, at least.
So I don't know what we put on for the description about what I was supposed to talk about for crevice gardening, but so I'm just going to give you kind of an overview, and actually we're going to build just a tiny one, which I actually started here, and we'll put hopefully get some plants in it fairly quickly here, and maybe get some time for some question and answer if that occurs. So I'm going to get started here and give you some background. So crevice gardening is a type of rock gardening, and I'm in the Rock Garden Society here in the Piedmont chapter here in North Carolina, but there's chapters throughout the United States and actually throughout the world. And one of the big centers of rock gardens, rock gardening in general, is in Eastern Europe, and in particular the Czech Republic has been one of the stars in that. And actually just last week they had the International Rock Garden Society meeting or something like that. I don't remember the formal title from that. And actually, some of our volunteers were over there and were telling me about it just this morning. But anyways, in the Czech Republic, that is where this type of gardening really originated in the early to mid 80s. But it's moved here to the United States, and probably just in the last 15 to 20 years, it's become a little bit more popular, and they're starting to spread throughout mainly the Western United States, but they will work here in the Southeast, and there are some really good examples in the Southeast as well. So probably the first place I actually got to see some of them were at the Denver Botanic Gardens. I think in 2010 was my first venture out there. And I didn't pay attention to them too much at that point. But the following year, I had the opportunity to go with the Arboretum over to England. And we went to Wentley. Wentley had a spectacular brand new crevice garden, and that stood out wonderfully there. And that was probably where I first took notice of them. So I've been back to Colorado several times and since then, and in 2014, March actually, one of the stars in North America for rock gardening and specifically crevice gardening, Kenton Seth, we brought him here as a speaker for our Rock Garden Society here in the Piedmont chapter. And he actually helped create our rock garden, our crevice garden right over here. I've added a little bit to him. I was an assistant when he built this. March 14th of, I think, or somewhere in there of 2014 was when that was constructed initially. So I learned a little bit from Kenton then. Since that time, Kenton and another fellow, Paul Spriggs from Victoria, British Columbia area, they have become the authorities, more or less, on crevice gardening in the United States and Canada. And they recently wrote a book last fall, I think it was published, and they've done interviews, and including one with the New York Times. And that's kind of what I'm using as my reference. I've had the opportunity again to meet with Kenton several times over the last 9 or 10 years. And anyways, he is a wealth of knowledge, and just the little bit you will find in the New York Times article will be enough to get whet your appetite for doing a rock garden. This style of rock gardening, the crevice gardening, and it's a bit different than what we think of as just rock gardening, which we have more so right over here to my left side here. We have more of a traditional rock garden with more rounded boulders and things. But anyways, so get back to the crevice garden here. So. When in Kenton and Paul Spriggs' book, they decided they really needed to define what was really a crevice garden, because technically in this style of rock garden over here, we still have crevices, but it's not quite the same as what we have over here. They decided more or less to give it a definition. It's a rock garden that has more or less 50% or more really of rock area versus soil area. And then the rocks, how they're arranged is more done to mimic natural areas fairly often, in that they are arranged kind of like strata. And it may be apparent, I don't know if that can be seen in our view of our own here, but I have some examples that hopefully I will be able to get Blake to bring up. The first one is the one from Arvada, Colorado. So that one is one actually Kenton did. It's actually at a pickleball court of all places in Arvada, Colorado. It's in one of the suburbs of Denver. It is spectacular. He did a wonderful job at doing that. And that one, it's a real naturalistic view. The picture that is actually maybe being videoed is a scaled down version of what Blake is showing you, but it's quite large. It's bigger than what the average person's going to have in their yard, but it's not as big as they can be. Another style is actually locally here in about 10, 12 miles from here at the Juniper Level Botanic Gardens. And I don't remember, I put Juniper Level on that one. So there's a little bit of view there. That one is actually, it's not done with rock. It's actually done with concrete, recycled concrete, or urbanite, as Tony Avent likes to call it. And it's a way of repurposing construction material in reality. And they've arranged it with, Kenton actually came and helped some, but Tony's employee, Jeremy Schmidt, who actually built this garden on my left, this more of a general rock garden, Jeremy built that in, I've forgotten what year now, but anyways, it's probably 200 to 300 feet long and about 15 to 20 feet deep. So it's a little bit on the bigger than the average person's going to have in their garden. Ours here at the Arboretum is still probably bigger than what most people would have in the garden. But that doesn't mean you can't have a crevice garden. And another picture I have, and I don't know did I give you this one? Do I have that one there?
Yeah.
And I don't know what I titled it. But this is just actually a close-up of one, just so you can see how things are really lined up in this case. This is a picture actually from Denver Botanic Garden, which they have several crevice gardens throughout the property there. And they've been done by different people. Kenton and Mike Kinchin is another person out there who's done them many times out there. But this is a little bit more blocky than, say, Kenton's style or what we have here. Actually, this is Kenton's style over here. But it's something you could actually achieve at home. So that's showing how they're typically done, have a strata look. So the other thing with what they wanted to decide and define as a crevice garden is that it's typically done more as a berm, so that there's some topography to it. It's not going to be done on a flat. In 2015, I had the opportunity to go to Michigan, and they have this rock formation called pavement, more or less, and it's flat rock outcrops. It's not that, and it literally looks like pavements, and you can use pavement, or that is old concrete, to build that too, and they actually did. But these have topography to them, and it gives it a whole lot different look, and you get microclimates in these. So actually, another thing that would be similar to pavement is if you have bricks like we do here in our roof garden. I have a whole beautiful garden that comes up in between the pavers, if you think about it. But I would not consider that a crevice garden, even though it is full of more crevices than one can count, and they're tiny crevices. So that was another thing that they used to define their crevice garden as what a true crevice garden would be. Another component of that is the size of those crevices. They aren't 6 feet wide. They aren't 6 inches wide. They're maybe an inch or so wide, or less even. So kind of like those pavers that are on the ground, actually below my feet, and Blake and all the interns and stuff all around us here right now. So but there is some leeway on that. And, you know, small crevices, not big, wide gaps. So most people might not be able to, like I said, be able to accomplish this in their own landscape in a large scale. But you can do this in hard spots, and that's something that Kenton and Paul Spriggs both mentioned too, is you can put this in that little space between your driveway and your garage, that little hole where the sidewalk comes around and meets up with the paved part, and then there's just a little corner. You could put it there in that small spot. Or, as I'm gonna do today, I just briefly show you how you can do it in a container. The bigger ones are somewhat cost prohibitive, but on a small scale, you can do this much easier with a nice container. It could be, like this case, this is a nice ceramic container. Could be a really nice hypertufa pot too, like I have out on the roof that a couple of our volunteers created for us several years ago. Or it could be way high scale and you get a stone one, if a stone trough, and do it in that. But you can even do it in a galvanized wash tub for all intents and purposes, and create that. So what these actually are really good for, it allows us to grow some things that might not otherwise be able to be grown, whether here or in other parts. You're able to mimic some conditions that you don't typically have in your own landscape naturally. And so Kenton, my stuff is all going to try to blow away from me today. But Kenton is a wonderful artist, and I think I have this drawing for that Blake can bring up. This kind of really demonstrates something that what it does to the plant material. And you can see how this actually illustrates many of the characteristics that they say are part of a crevice garden. I'm hoping, do you have the illustration up? Okay, so I think in the picture you can see it's a drawing. It is a berm in this drawing. You can see it's a side view of it. So you can see the plant's roots growing down. So these plant's roots aren't just in the top couple inches of the soil. They are forced to go very deep down through those crevices. They don't get to go horizontally except for in one or two planes, not the whole way around the plant 360 degrees. It's a very limited space. So it forces them to root deep, where conditions are often much more stable temperature-wise and often moisture-wise. And the other thing here, the media that you typically use between these stones and these crevice gardens are very nutrient poor. So it's also forcing them to root deep if they want to get to nutrients. So if in the open ground, for instance, you can see in that illustration, there's the top part, which is probably a sandy media with a very little nutrient value. But they're trying to encourage those plants, again, to go down deep to get to the natural soil that's below where they're at. And you can get some things to grow here that are in these conditions that you can't grow otherwise. You're kind of forcing them to grow on the lean side, and they're really hardy that way. If if we eat too much and indulge too much, we we kind of get a big stomach ourselves, and we all end up having secondary disease issues because of things. The plants are the same way. It shortens our lives. It shortens the plants' lives too when they're a little bit gluttonous. You're growing these on the ones who only have the minimal number of calories they need in a day. So it forces them to do that. It also provides a lot of microclimates that you can create in these crevices, like depending on how you orient your container. If it's in a container or your whole bed, you can get a north and south facing side or a west side, which the conditions on all those different sides are going to have very different environmental conditions that will allow you to grow some different things. So, and you may get something, a tiny little shaded pocket, which lets you to grow something that you couldn't grow on the other side. And it might be 10 degrees cooler. So these are kind of really cool ways of growing plants because of that. And like I said, we're going to do I'm going to do a container here, but I have some illustrations of containers too that I've seen. I've seen them in various places, but these are a couple that I saw at a garden in Pinckney, Michigan. In 2015, and this is one, it's done in an old water trough, I think is what it is. And it's actually not using consistent rock, but it is truly a crevice garden. It has, they have a contoured arrangement of the stones. And you can see quite a few different things being grown in this, from flax and sempervivums to, it's been a while since I've seen this. It has some lilies and there's probably 8 or 10 other things in this trough. But something as simple as that can be turned into a containerized crevice garden. I won't say portable. They tend to be a little bit on the heavy side. Another one I have, this is just, he hasn't quite planted much in it yet, but this was an example just as a really well done crevice garden in the works. Just starting to plant. It looks like it's in a stone trough, which when I was at this place, the next location we went, they were actually the guy was making stone troughs, and they had workshops with their rock garden society to make stone troughs out of certain kind of rock they had there that just naturally was porous and didn't even need a drainage hole in it. So you can really see in that how they did the strata and on that. And that's kind of what I'm want to do today in my little demo trough I have here, or container I have here of a crevice garden. You might want to know that the rocks that you use, or the material you use, whether it's rock or a man-made product, it doesn't have to be something that's perfectly uniform like a brick. You want actually some variation in size of the material. I have some shards here that I've been using. I don't know if I have some varying size pieces of stone in here that I have assembled. I actually put this together fairly quickly today. I had an epiphany just before noon what I was going to do for this. Prior to that, it's like, how am I going to talk to you guys about this? And anyways, I managed to come up with this idea just before lunch, and I had to reassemble it a little bit after I did a little bit more research as well. But it's not something that's very difficult to create, especially on a small scale like this. And it's very affordable at this size too, because you don't have to buy entire pallets of stone to do something like this. We had a pallet of stone though in the back that I just got some of the smaller pieces from. And I'm not sure if you can see yet, but how I have arranged these in a strata type orientation, mimicking the sedimentary rocks that you might see, say, along the road or even in the wild. I know I didn't get around to finding it, but I had a picture from, a mountain in Washington, and I'm blanking on it. Just outside of Seattle, anyways, and it was a perfect natural crevice garden. I saw that in 2018, and I don't know if I have those in my photo collection here at work yet, but anyways, I was going to show that, but I didn't get a chance to find that one. But what I have in this thing here is, for a container, is a little different than actually doing it in the ground. In the ground, you're going to use fairly, like I said, a fairly nutrient poor media or soil, which is largely going to be sand. It can have some other things in it. Some rumble, I think, is what the term that Paul and Kenton used. I call it rubble. Some odd junk stuff, some sand, and what else did they actually say here? I have to review a little bit. Bear with me just for a second. I'm not finding how they're wording. It's Kenton is wonderful with his words. I'm always short on words, but specifics anyways. It's nothing special, but a fairly nutrient poor soil. You don't want that rich clay that you have in your yard that you think is the worst thing in the world. It's actually full of nutrients. You don't realize it. On the coastal plain where you have sand, you might just be able to dig a hole and mound the sand to the one side and build this. But for here in the Piedmont, you're going to want to use some sand. And that's basically what's in here. We have, on our crevice garden over here, we just filled it with a basic builder's sand. And then we planted in that. That's all that is. And then we put a mulch on top of that. A container, because it's a closed system, you can't get away quite with doing that. You need to have some nutrients in there. So you do need to add a little bit of some soil or to help out a little bit. And they also recommended some perlite. So I have some components down here somewhere. What did I do with them all? Oh, here we go. So some of the things they suggested were, okay. So this is actually a builder's sand here, which I've recycled. This is actually, if anyone was here for our moonlight, this is the sand that was out of our bags that held down our luminaria. So, which was builder sand. I have a tiny bit of just some good loose soil that I got out of the garden. And then they suggested using pumice, which pumice for us is difficult, or perlite. Perlite you can get. It is nasty to work with, but in this small amounts, it's not too bad. And they gave just a rough component-wise. It was like, I think 7 parts sand, 2 parts of perlite, 1 part of soil. Is a good material to start with in your container. So that's what I mixed up, and right here I have that. So. Anyways, so I'm going to get these out of the way again. And I've already done some construction here, and I've got to fill in here. I've done part way. I started with a base of the of this material here, that soil, and then I started in my container. I started stacking the rock in here and standing it up. And as you can see, I don't have big slots here, big wide gaps. They can be really thin in some cases. Actually, Amelia Lane, who was the volunteer I was talking to this morning, who had just been to the Czech Republic last week, to the meeting over there, she said they were basically buttering the pieces of stone and putting the roots in there. They were buttering it with a mud almost and putting in there just the tiniest bit of material. It doesn't have to be a lot, but in this case, I'm doing it with some bigger spacing. I am not that. This is a fast, easier way to do it. If you really want to do some detail work, though, you could do it that way. So I'm going to fill in around these stones, I'm hoping this works out. It's been a while since I've done this. I have to work it down in here, and a little tool that Tenton gave me when he was here was, it's actually a nut picker is what it says on it, but he called it, I think, a widger. You know, a hickamadoo, you know, he had his words for everything. Thingamabob, that he called it a widger, but I'm going to use that to kind of sift the soil down in here and get this filled in and maybe settled in, because you want to have it structurally sound, especially if you're doing it in the ground and on a scale that we have over there. There's some of the stones on the backside that are about 12 to 15 inches down as a foundation, and we used those as the foundation to build the others off that tapered down. And here I don't have that deep of a container. And most of your containers don't have to be that big, but they do need to have the rock deep enough that it's stable and doesn't fall out of place and you lose the structure of your in your container. So I'm going to work this stuff in here. And this isn't like a pot I can just lift and shake and have it tamped down in. It's a little heavier than that. To get this off of here, I might have to get some help from one or two of my interns when I'm done. I was able to put it on here before I filled this in, but when I'm done with this, I might not be able to. So. And there'll be some pockets in here that are fairly large, but not very big. And then I'll have other pockets that are super thin, just a fraction of an inch. So you can get a variety of different things to grow in these. Like I said, it's a great way of experimenting with something you might not be able to grow elsewhere in your garden, because you don't have quite the right conditions, or you tend to do things that are smaller, and those smaller things might get lost in your garden too, which is the other reason for doing this. And so now I'm getting in here. I have some bigger slots, but I might augment some of this this will help me fill in some of the gaps and make more crevices. And it'll stabilize things too. But I'm keeping with this strata appearance here, so. This is my quick nitty-gritty thing, doing this. And it is gritty. So it is fairly stable here. Just, it's the table that's wobbling that I worry more about than anything else right now. So I've gotten this, the base done for this, and I have a few plants over here. So I'm gonna push some of this stuff out of the way. Some of my visual aids here are gonna go out of the way. And hopefully I'll get them so they don't blow away. I can just go like this, get that over there. I have some little plants over here, and we'll see what I use. I may not use all these, but I even have some things I commandeered from off the roof. But one of the things that they also said, ideally, you will wash the roots, especially if it's a container grown plant, to get rid of a lot of the material on that, because they're kind of being babied in that peat perlite mix entirely. This way, we have sand perlite, but I have a variety of things here. I have a couple Delospermums, or ice plants. This is a new one for us that we grew from seed. This is a Delosperma saudahense. I don't know too much about what it's going to do yet, but so what did I do with my, oh, here's my widger, my nutcracker. I don't know how you'd crack a nut with this, to tell you the truth. I can't even see how you'd pick the nut with it. Prise it open. Oh, okay. I just used one like that when I was growing up. So anyways, you find a place where you can make a hole in here. This one has actually a decent sized root ball on it, and you find a place, and then you use this to tease it down in. And if you had water with you, which I don't really have at the moment, you would go and you would rinse the soil back down into the around the roots. But you can press it in here with this. Another little bugger I have here, and I don't know how big this is yet. This is an Erysimum, which actually has some Erysimum over here, but it's a different species. This is Erysimum whitmanii. It's a type of wallflower, but right now it's an adorable little seedling. I have a cell pack full of these, but the foliage is just beautiful on these, and are almost plastic. But I could see putting some of these in here, and I'll put it on the other. I'll show you from that side here ultimately. I'm gonna do another one here. So this is, I start with this, and I need to rinse off the roots. You might repeat a few things, depending on how big the plants are you put in this. I was telling Blake, you could even think, I guess, if you did it right, you could do a bonsai in one of these. So you do the right stone arrangement, and have that tree coming out of a rock outcropping. So I got those somewhat reasonably rinsed off here. Let's see if I can squeeze another one in here. And this pushes it down in there. I'll probably end up killing a few of these, but I mean, this is the time to kill them when they're small and when they're larger. So other things, we were talking about a plant propagation workshop. Something that's super hard to propagate. Sedums, they're wonderful for this. This one I just pulled out, but it does have a handful of roots on it. It really doesn't have to have too many. This is one called Firecracker. You can just make push it down in there. It's not an enormous growing sedum, so it's actually very conducive to put in such like this. And it picks up, actually this Delosperma has a nice little pink flower, so it kind of goes with that. This has some rose tones to the foliage. And pink flowers later on. So I'm just gonna stick these in a few spots here. Some other things that are really good. This is another close relative of the sedum. This is a Orostachys, which is like a little hen and chick. And these I can just put in here. I kill regular hens and chicks, some provivums in the garden pretty easily here. We're just so hot, but these tend to do fairly well for us. A little bit better than some provivums most of the time for us. You can wedge them into these spots. And I have another one here. Let's put it over here. Plant it in here. So, and another thing I was looking at on the rooftop, we are starting to get seedling cacti. So this is, I think, one that I've actually lost the parent plant. I think it's a parodia that we had, which I'm not sure what the going taxonomy for this is today, but when we received it, it was what was called a parodia. Cacti taxonomy is a little bit of a in flux every other day, I think. Some look very similar, and it's like, are you sure those aren't the same genus? But I don't know if that'll fit there. I might get it in right here. But this is one that popped up in my rooftop. So these are just some basics that we could do here. I also have some Arboretum, which is it's actually closely related to the Erysimums. It's a kind of crest. I kill these, so let's see, I might as well do it right now. I'll kill one of these too. I don't often like our summers. Erysimums will typically make it, but I have killed quite a few Arboretums, and will continue to do so. And this is Olympica. I don't know. So I'm assuming Mount Olympia in Greece is where it's probably from, or in that general vicinity. So we'll see what happens here. I'm going to squeeze it in on this side over here. But this would probably have either pink or white flowers in the spring, if it survives our being planted in here. So I've gotten several little plants in here, and you really don't have to put a lot. I've seen some that are as simple as just 3 or 4 different plants throughout the whole container. So it doesn't have to be anything too complex. So after that, you typically want to put a mulch on it. And in this case, I have ready access to permatil. Not everybody does that, so I'm going to use that as one of my base mulch type material in here. I could have actually used this as my soil amendment instead of the perlite or pumice. So I'm just going to go in here. You want a stone that is sharp, so it has sharp edges, not rounded. Like I have some rounded edge pebbles here. These aren't good because they slide, especially when they're on a slope. The sharp gravel, or in this case, my permatil, will ultimately tend to stay where it's put. It'll slide some, but not as much as a round pebble. And I got to make a mess here. Blake was wondering if I wanted to put a nice table cover on this today, and I said no. Between the rocks and the dirt, no. Making a filthy mess out of all this. And so, another thing I have around here, I have some down here, and I have a little bit right here. I have some shards that I made from when I was, actually, I hammered a little bit. I have, to adjust the shapes on some of these a little bit, I can put in some smaller pieces of stone in here. And this can also help hold things in, and it'll make it a lot more visually pleasing. And so, kind of look like a scree on a mountainside. If anybody has ever gotten to go to a natural scree, we have our man-made scree on the backside of the McSwain Center, or what we call a scree. I've gotten to experience some real screes in Colorado. Anyways, this is coming together to some extent. So basically, there is my container crevice garden. And we'll see what I can kill here. I don't think I need to worry about anybody carrying this thing away. So, So it's something you can easily do at home and not take up a lot of space. Depending on what kind of plant material you'd want to you could situate it in sun or shade, part shade. It doesn't have to be xeric plants like I'm using here, but they can be. If you're going to do something that needs a little more water, you may have to adjust your soil composition a little bit so it's a little bit more moisture holding. But the whole premise is very much transferable, and that's something that Kenton and Paul mentioned in the article, is that this can be anything from a container size to something as big as or bigger than what Tony Avon has at Juniper Level Botanic Gardens at over 200 plus feet long. So, it's something that can be scaled and almost anybody can do. Do we have any questions?
We sure do. Would you speak briefly about the necessity of drainage holes in the container?
In a container, yeah, you want to have drainage, unless you're wanting a bog, and we don't want a bog here. These plants don't want to sit in water typically, though unless I don't know, you could probably do a bog crevice garden. I have seen vertical rock formations with bog plants in them. You could do, it's a little more complicated, but you could probably do sundews and butterworts, for instance, and maybe spiranthes orchids or something. I guess you could do that. In that case, you probably wouldn't want to have a drainage, but for most of it, you're going to want drainage if you're going to do it in a container. And that's typical in almost any container garden you're going to do. You don't want to have you want to have some sort of drainage in it. This has a hole in the center of the bottom of this container so that water can't escape, instead of forming a pond in there or a bog garden.
That's great advice. And anybody at home who wants to pull together a bog rock crevice garden, a mini one, do it. Let us know how it goes. We would love to hear.
I mean, yeah. That would be very interesting. You could put a bubbler in it and have and have it drip from the top.
No kidding. Yeah. So give it a shot and let us know how that goes. Okay. Someone's asking, what about pH? Is it an issue?
Again, it would depend on the plant material you're using. pH is something you might take into account. I don't worry too much with what I'm putting in here, but if you're using some really specific plants that are super calciphytes or something, or halophytes that need a really specific range, you might need to adjust the pH. You could say if it's an ericaceous plant, you might want to have a lower pH for like rhododendrons or something. Like I said, ericaceous plants. In that bog idea, you could almost put a cranberry. And again, it would probably want a lower pH in that. But it could be with the rock garden-esque side of it. There's some plants that live only on limestone, and so they typically are more adapted to higher pHs. So in this case, this is the sand's pretty inert, so it's not going to have any specific major pH range. It would depend on the only thing, and the perlite's inert, and the soil I use, that would be the only thing that has a major pH to it that would be of any consequence beyond 7. So,
awesome. Okay, one of our viewers has let us know that they've Googled Widger and found that they are available for sale from prominent seed starting supply companies for $11.
So that's what it's actually called? Okay.
It's actually called that. Go figure.
Yeah.
Who knew? Learn something new every day.
Yeah.
One of our viewers also asked, will you be leaving this container garden in the rooftop garden for us to see later?
I'm not sure yet. I might have to because it's too heavy to move.
Okay. Well, that's fair. Let us know what ultimately happens to it.
Yeah, I might find a way to put it in here. Because like I said, I don't think anybody's going to carry this away.
Sure. Well, let us know what happens to it, and if visitors to the garden will be able to see it, and we will put that down in the description.
And watch it die as I forget. Oh, darn. Interns, can you water this for me? So,
Wonderful. So someone's asking, so do you have a base of more nutrient-dense soil beneath your rocks, or did you
I did not in this case, but whenever it's in the ground, you typically will have higher nutrients. That's why I added some topsoil to this, and they suggested adding some topsoil to it was to have some nutrient base. If in the beds in the ground, that's totally a palisand, and then there's the native soil below it. And so we're wanting those roots to go deep. And I forgot to show you. This is a weed from my crevice garden over here. It's a Silene paradoxa, which actually came from a container that's out on the roof. It got blown in here, and it loves the crevice garden. It's actually in flower now, but unfortunately it's nocturnal. No one gets to see them when they're open, except for me first thing in the morning. But this is a weedling that I pulled out just before we started. And I didn't straighten that taproot out. So, like I said, they go deep.
They sure do. Okay, someone's asking, well, first they said great demo, but then they're asking, what are the biggest mistakes to avoid in something like this?
I don't know. It's just something, I mean, it's experiment.
Yeah.
So if you don't experiment, you're not going to learn, I guess. That might be the biggest mistake.
There you go. I love that. That's the best answer. Absolutely. That is the answer. If you're not experimenting, that's the mistake. There you go. Okay. Someone's asking, how often will you water?
That all might depend on the weather. It's like for the containers here on the roof, I've only watered, I think, once this year so far, but we had, up until about 2 weeks ago, we were having rain every other day. It seemed like anyways. And through the winter months, you don't have to water as much. Through the summer, I might have to water almost every day. So once things get going, especially when we have days that are in the mid 90s, I might have to find the right spot for this up here. It might not end up right here because there's no protection here. I might put this in part shade, just because it is a container and it could dry out. But
okay, so someone's asking, well, so what would be done differently if you were doing this in the ground instead of the container, especially with regards to like the soil? Someone's asking, so in the ground, would you just put sand over the native soil?
Exactly.
Okay.
Yep.
Just sand, no permatil or perlite?
You don't have to, no.
Okay.
Or, I mean, you can put some rubble in there to help build up so you don't have only sand at the base.
Right.
Yeah, to fill in gaps, but yeah.
Yeah.
It's pretty bland, basic conditions.
Nice.
And actually in rock gardening, there are what they call sand mounds. It's a way of doing a rock garden, and it's a specific type of rock gardening. And this is kind of a sand mound with stone in it, lots of stone.
Do you have any suggestions for native plants to use?
Something, if you were typically want smaller things, but if it's in a larger setting and it's in a like part shade, which a lot of people have because if they're in established landscapes and developments, you may try heucheras or some of our native ferns, whether sun ferns or shade ferns. Actually, right next to me is a Myriopteris, which used to be a calanthes. This is Javapensis, but we have it was a southwestern species, but we have calanthes or Myriopteris lanosa is one of our native ferns. It's a sun fern. It would be probably happy as a clam in such a situation. Looked at a lot of things that might be in the Sandhills region that you might find down there. Viola pedata, the bird's foot violets, for instance, might be worth a try in such a situation. I mean, again, this is that experimenting thing. So, and we do have some native sedums. Sedum ternatum it's a shade plant in the mountains, actually, of all places. I think it would be perfectly content in a situation like this. So.
I love it. Yeah, just go find something native that you love and put it in your own
See what happens.
garden. See what happens.
In this bed over here, give me just a second. I need to look up a name.
Okay.
See what we're calling it at this moment. Here we go. It's on this side, so you can't see it. Herasium tomentosum is a native daisy, and it has felty leaves, and it forms really nice rosettes. And it's adoring actually the north side of this right now. It used to be on this side too, but I think it would be one to try in such a situation. It's one of the, what do they call these? I'm terrible at common names, sorry, but here's the Latin if you want to look that up. But yeah, that one's a native composite, but it would be worth a try. If it's again in a shaded spot, you might try green and gold, which is Chrysogonum virginicum. It has this stoloniferous habit, much actually as this thing does, and I think it might be conducive to go up in between things. I think it's native, anyways.
Yeah, and the common name for Hyraceum.
Hawkweed.
It's woolly hawkweed.
Woolly hawkweed.
That's a really nice common name, actually.
So,
I like that.
So anyways, those are maybe some. So.
Yeah, definitely. And Alexander, you're very blurry right now. Yeah.
You mean I'm blurry?
Yeah, that too. That too. Okay, so once again, could you remind us of the composition for the mulch that you used?
Oh, the mulch I just used, in this case, I just used I had permatil.
The one that was the media.
The media, in this case, I used about, they were saying 7 parts, I think, sand, and I figured this is out of 10, and it was like, I think 2 parts perlite, or they said pumice, which perlite's readily available, or I think the permatil would work as well. So 2 parts of that and about 1 part of topsoil, a nice topsoil, just to mix in there for some nutrients.
And one final question for the day. If you notice material washing away, presume you can carefully add more sand, permanent rocks to secure
That's
it?
what we've had. It'll settle for a while, and then you can build it up again. So, yeah.
Okay, great. Well, that's all the time we have for today. I just want to say real quick, geez, Tim, that's beautiful. That composition, it looks like a little mountain. Like you did an amazing job with that.
And that's what they want, is a little mountain.
Yeah, for sure. And keep in mind, people at home, he just pulled this together in less than an hour, and it's just gorgeous. It's wonderful.
I need to water it in. Yeah,
needs to water it in. That is crucial. That is absolutely important. Okay, so we will be back next week, next Wednesday at 3 o'clock for the midweek program. We're going to have Dan Stern here. He's the director of horticulture for the North Carolina Botanical Garden over in UNC Chapel Hill. Greg Page, our own director of horticulture, will be having a nice little garden conversation with him. We're going to be building the camaraderie amongst the public gardens in the area. It's a beautiful thing. I hope you all will join us for that. We'll see y'all next week. Y'all take care.